one day in a few generations, children will be living a complete dystopian nightmare and we won't know how they got there. So do something about it now while you can. You know what? Get stuffed. We don't care what you say. Because right now we live in a country where people are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to be the nail that stands up because they know they're going to get hit with the hammer. Government is trying to restrict speech. Don't be quiet. Censorship is a very bad concept and it will only lead to misery. They've bent the knee, they've touched their toes to globalist interests. In my opinion, they can't stand you. They just want to step on the throat of the average everyday person and they're just pushing and pushing and pushing. You need to speak. If you just sit at home and you're quiet and you're silent, nothing will change and it will just keep getting worse. Always believe in yourself. I had a lot of people tell me that I couldn't do so many things in my life, and here I am today. I'm the Senator for Victoria in Australia in federal parliament.
When I was researching you, because I wanted to look up a bit about you before we interviewed you and before we met, a lot of the media articles were haranguing you for still working in your family's company of real estate.
Yes.
Why do you think the media hates people who work?
Well, I think Australia in general, we've gone so far left that we no longer appreciate entrepreneurial attitudes or people that want to work hard for a living. In all the media articles and whenever a reporter from mainstream news has asked me, I've always said, hey, look, guys, my Senate work is my main source of income, my main source of pride, my main source of excitement in life. That's what I love to do. And on the weekend, instead of sitting at home doing nothing, watching TV or watching sports or whatever it is, on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, what I like to do is I like to help out in the family business, and I like to go out and go to an open home, for example. And when I do that, I actually meet a lot of people, and people tell me, hey, aren't you that guy from the news? Aren't you that guy from social media? Did I see you the other day, or have I met you before? I'm like, well, actually, I'm actually a senator for Victoria, and we get into a conversation. And what they tell me is that they're suffering. They are suffering under economic mismanagement because of the cost of living crisis that we're in right now. So people in Australia are suffering. Prices are up on everything because of inflation. They can't afford to pay their bills, and they're struggling with their power prices, for example. And I actually get a really, really good feel for how people in my community are. So I think it's actually a benefit that I have a normal job, because if I have a normal job, of course, on the weekends, not during the times that Parliament is sitting and not when I'm supposed to do any parliamentary business, I get to talk to regular everyday people and I get to act like a regular everyday person and really understand the pain points in our community right now. So what the media should actually be saying is, aren't we glad that Senator Babet has a normal job and he's out in the community and meeting people, instead of being in what we like to call the Canberra bubble and completely disconnected from the average person?
Talking about disconnection and inflation, what is really driving inflation, and what actionable steps could the government take, say, in the next 6 months to really mitigate what's going on at the moment?
Stop spending money.
That's simple. Perfect.
It's that
done.
simple. So to our government right now, which is the Labor Party in Australia, stop spending money. The more money you spend, the more you devalue the currency that's in circulation right now. It's not difficult. It's not hard to understand. If the government is going to continually devalue the currency by spending money that, in a lot of the cases, they don't have, what's going to happen is the money that's already in circulation is going to be worth less. And the only people who suffer from a devaluing currency, it's not corporations, it's not high net worth individuals, it's not the elite as such, it's people that are on a wage. Because people that are on a wage can only earn X amount of dollars per month or X amount of dollars per year. That's not changing anytime soon. They can't just, put up their prices as such, right? They can't collect more income from the system. They can't do that. They're on a wage. So inflation, what I like to say, is a hidden tax on the public. And the government, when they spend money, yeah, sure, it looks good. It might help you win any election. It might help you in the polls. But what it's really doing is it's disadvantaging the average Australian. If the government wants to help people, if they really want to help the disadvantaged or anything like this, the answer is not spending more money. The answer is removing red tape, removing regulations, and allowing people to go out there and work and create a life for themselves. That's the answer, not just spending cash, because spending cash is not the answer.
Where are some of the biggest leaks when it comes to financially what the government are doing at the moment?
Biggest what?
The biggest leaks. Like, where are they spending the most money?
Okay.
Yeah.
So in Australia, it's a Kiwi accent. It's a Kiwi accent. That's going to go viral. The biggest problem right now, I think, is in our country, in Australia, is the NDIS scheme. So the NDIS stands for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It is full of leaks. It costs us billions of dollars a year. I'll give an idea of what it's like. So the NDIS, the whole idea is to help people that are disadvantaged, that need help. But what the NDIS has ended up being is a haven for fraudsters. Let's say you have a disability, as an example. The government will pay for you to access services that you might need, which is fair enough. I agree with it. I think it's great in concept. Let's say you need remedial massage. Let's say you have a back issue. If you go in and you say, look, I've got a back issue. I'm here on the NDIS scheme. I need help from the government. They'll say, you're on the NDIS? Sure, $300 as an example, right? So these aren't real numbers, as an example. But let's say you walked in there yourself and you're paying cash as a regular punter. They'll say $150. So the NDIS is just a way for people to fraud the system. Unfortunately, it's not the people that need the services itself. It's the people that are providing the services that are taking advantage. Because the NDIS is, frankly, a very, very messy system, and it's not been thought out very well. So that's probably the biggest leakage at the moment, in one of the biggest leakages at the moment in government. Do
you think the COVID policies and the COVID spending and borrowing had a lot to do with the current inflation rate?
Definitely. I mean, our government now in Australia is in about $1 trillion of debt, approximately, something like this. That $1 trillion was spent on all sorts of things during the COVID lockdown. What they should have done is they should have looked at countries like Sweden, for example, that didn't lock down, or states like Florida that did kind of lock down initially. But then when the data came out and the data showed that, hey, these lockdowns are counterproductive, it's not really working, they changed their direction. That's what they should have done. Looked internationally and said, what's working overseas? What can we do here in Australia that is going to be beneficial for our country based off best practice overseas? But they didn't do that. And now we're saddled with $1 trillion of debt in Australia. And who's going to pay it off? The average everyday punter is going to pay it off through their taxes. It's not right. It's an example of government overreach, and we need to put an end to it.
You mentioned earlier that you were an immigrant when I was listening to you and being interviewed by somebody else. What was your immigration story? How did that play out with you and your family? Yeah,
so my parents came here from a small island called Rodrigues. They came to Australia for a better life. Rodrigues is a beautiful country. It's a fantastic place to live, but it is a small island. So they came here to give more opportunities for their kids, and opportunities, obviously, I have had. I absolutely love Australia. I think Australia is a beautiful country, and I've travelled a lot across the world as well. And every time I come back home, I always think how lucky I am to live in a country like Australia, because in Australia, there is nothing stopping you from achieving whatever you want to do. You can be a troll on Twitter, you can be an actor, you can be a politician like me, you can own a small business, you can own a large business. Nothing at all is stopping. It just comes down to how hard you want to work and how much effort you want to put in. That's why I love Australia so much. I'm very blessed to be here. And I think the issue with Australia right now, and possibly many other Western countries, is people don't appreciate what they have because they haven't travelled outside of their borders to see how other people in less fortunate countries live. And I think in the West right now, we've got a lot of naysayers, a lot of people, especially in our educational institutions, that are talking crap about our respective countries and not really appreciating how good we have it here. So to those people, I say, knock it off. If you go overseas and you see how some other people live, you would be more appreciative of what we have here in our respective homes.
You spoke earlier about communism. Can you describe your interpretation of communism?
Look, communism is an overbearing government that controls the means of production. That's what it really is, right? And I think when you take away individual liberties, when you take away an individual's ability to create and to have ownership over what they make, then what you're really saying is that, you want to crush the human spirit. You want to crush the human soul. You want to take away what it means to be a person. And obviously, I'm not a fan of communism. I don't think anyone should be, because we've got to keep in mind that communism, as we know in the 20th century, has resulted in the deaths of approximately, by some accounts, of 100 million people. Communism sounds great in a textbook, but communism in practice really means authoritarian governments. It means prison camps. It means death. It means you're not going to be able to feed your children. It means suffering. That's what it really, really means. And not just communism, socialism as well. Socialism is, for lack of a better word, the cousin to communism. All of these things that I dislike about communism, in socialism, it is just communism light. So I like to push back against both of those ways of thinking.
Do you see aspects of Marxist socialism coming into play here in Australian politics and in some of the policies they're trying to introduce?
Absolutely, absolutely. With all the culture war stuff that we're seeing right now in our country, where they, really going after, the culture of the youth, we're seeing a lot of that today. And I think Australians, because we've had it so good for so long, we don't really recognise, or possibly want to recognise, what's happening in our culture. But I think the important thing is that the Australian people realise that there are nefarious actors in our institutions at the moment that would like our nations to go in a different direction than what they're going at the moment. And that direction will not lead to a good place over time. What we need to do is we need to rediscover a love of country. We need to rediscover a love of individual freedoms and rights. And we need to say to the government that we are free and sovereign people, and we want to live our lives how we want to live our lives, and we want you to stay out of it as much as possible. There will always be a place for government, of course. You need government, but government should be as small as possible and as weak as possible to get as much done as they can, but at the same time staying small so that they don't overreach into people's lives.
Who are the people that are driving this idea of Marxist socialism, communism in Australia? Do you think it's idealistic people that have come up through the academic sector?
Idiots. I think it's absolute idiots. It's people that have never opened a history book. That's what it is. It's people that have no understanding of what's happened, 60, 70 years ago and how things really could be today. It's kids. It's kids mostly that have grown up in a safe nation, that have come up through the ranks and have never experienced what life was like in some of these European countries where we've seen communism and socialism really, really take hold. It's just people that refuse to understand history. I am a student of history. I understand what's happened previously, and I understand where we're heading as a people if we keep going down the path that we're going down now. If more people open history books, we wouldn't be experiencing what we're experiencing right now. And it's a shame that we're in the position that we're in now, where people like me have to stand up and, fight for what I think are very simple things, but that other people just refuse to comprehend and understand.
You have a vote coming up soon for something called The Voice. Can you explain to Kiwi listeners what The Voice means?
No one knows what The Voice means, because not even the Prime Minister of our nation knows what The Voice means. But, essentially what it is the government wants to create a voice for Indigenous people in Australia. That voice will have the ability to influence government decisions. So as an example, if there is a piece of legislation that's coming up through the Parliament that's going to affect Indigenous people, which, let's be honest, it's absolutely everything affects Indigenous people because they're people just like everyone else, then this voice will have a say on what happens, right? And what we know from what's happened already with everything else, this voice is obviously going to be infiltrated by left-wing activists. And these left-wing activists will have a direct say, without being elected officials, in what happens in our nation. Look, The Voice is a very, very messy thing. I think all we need to know about The Voice is that The Voice divides our nation by race, because it says if you've got brown skin, you can have a say outside of what everyone else can in our democratic process. And that's all you really need to know about it. It divides us by race. It divides us by color of skin. I think it was Martin Luther King who said, don't judge me on the color of my skin, judge on the content of character. That's what he said. And I think we need to stick to that. We need to reject The Voice and say, you know what? We don't need any detail. We don't need to know anything else. All we need to know is that we're all one people. We're all green and gold. We're all Australians. We all have our say at the election every 3 years, and that's it. We're not going to divide on the colour of skin. That's that.
In New Zealand, they've introduced a similar concept with co-governance, but they're implementing it in different ways. So rather than having it as one overall concept, they're doing it kind of strategically in individual sectors. And part of that has meant recently our health system now prioritises people based on a points-based system. Yeah, where if you're Māori or Pacifica, you can get certain points and then get surgeries ahead of other people rather than based on need. And it's caused a real uproar with people realising this is racially divisive. They say it's to solve historic inequality problems. Where do you see the options that could actually help solve true inequality without turning back to originally racist policies?
Look, the best way to solve the problem of inequality is not things like The Voice. The best way to solve that is by reducing regulation and having a good educational system. That's how you do it. You say to people, look, education is important. We want all of you to go through the process of learning, but not just, we're not going to teach you what to learn. We're going to show you how to learn. We're going to show you how to be an entrepreneur. We're going to show you how to be an individual. We're going to show you how to better your life through that system. So giving people the opportunity of education, that's how you really help people. And then on the other side, you reduce regulation, you reduce red tape, and you allow people to create a life for themselves that they envisage. That's how you really help people.
New Zealand's previous health director was a guy called Ashley Bloomfield. He's now been knighted due to his courageous service during the COVID pandemic. He's now working with the World Health Organization on the pandemic treaty. Are you concerned about the pandemic treaty from the WHO and how they could take individual sovereignty off Australia?
I am concerned, actually. Yeah, it's actually a very concerning thing. The Australian government, without a pandemic treaty, followed basically to the letter what the World Health Organization asks them to follow. And obviously to disastrous effect, because in our nation, we had lockdowns for years. We had, and we still have, people unable to work because of vaccine mandates and things like that. We lost a lot of our freedoms and our rights. People were locked in their homes. Pregnant women were getting arrested because they made Facebook posts organizing protests and things like this. So the World Health Organization, I believe, is a dangerous organization, in my personal belief. And the reason why I think they're dangerous is because, like you said, they take away our sovereignty. They take away our ability as Australians to make our own decisions about our own health policy. And it's not just the World Health Organization. It's the United Nations as well. It's the World Economic Forum. These unelected globalist bodies are making decisions for our nations without us having a real input into those decisions. So I would actually push back very strongly against the WHO, the WEF, the UN, and all the other sister organizations and say, hey, you know what? Get stuffed. We don't care what you say. Yes, we'll have a seat at the table and we'll listen, but you're not going to tell us what to do in our nations because our sovereignty is important. At the end of the day, all of our nations, be it New Zealand or Australia or Canada or America, whatever, we need to make decisions that are best for us. These unelected globalist bodies cannot tell us what we can and can't do. Yeah, we can sit at the table, that's fine, but at the end of the day, the decision has to be ours.
New Zealand's wanting to introduce a social media regulator. I know they're wanting to do a similar bill here in Australia. They've already done one in Canada, wanting to introduce one in Ireland and the UK. How do you think having a social media regulator could impact people such as yourself being able to freely and actively campaign on social platforms or on the internet in general?
Yeah, look, we shouldn't be regulating anything. I'll give an example. If it's legal and lawful to say, if you're not calling for violence, for example, as an example, the government should not be stepping in and saying you can't say it, right? The governments of all of our, this goes back to what I said before about the unelected global bodies. All of these suggestions come from these unelected global bodies. That's why Australia is going down the same path as what New Zealand is right now, because the orders come from up here. These bodies obviously want to control our individual nations. The government will say disinformation, misinformation, etc., it's harmful. And I would agree in some cases it can be harmful. But I would also argue that the answer to mis or disinformation is not government censorship. The answer is more freedom and more free speech. because the best disinfectant for incorrect speech is the truth. And the only way you're going to come to the truth is if you allow people to have a public debate, and then naturally the best ideas or the right things will rise to the surface. If you restrict people's ability to speak, if you stop them from saying what they think and feel, right or wrong, what's going to happen is that's going to fester and that's going to bubble up. And then what we're going to see is potentially increases in violence and things of that nature because you send ideas and things underground. As an example, racism, or let's go fully extreme, let's say full extreme Nazi ideology. No sane person would say that the ideology of the Nazis is a good thing. But if you ban it, if you say this ideology is now not allowed to be discussed, what happens then is instead of being talked about in an open forum, it goes underground. It's underground, it's allowed to fester, it gets worse, and that could explode. Whereas if you have that in the public sphere, in the public domain, freely able to be discussed, people will provide better ideas to that. They'll say, it's not okay to be a racist. These are some better ideas. We're all one people. We're all part of the human family, etc. And it will extinguish those bad ideas pretty quickly. So I think that the whole concept of censorship overall is a very bad concept, and it will only lead to misery in our nations.
How do you find it being within Parliament itself and working with other senators? Do you find that they want to actually work with people that come from different parties with different ideas and they actually want to communicate openly and freely? Or do you find that they really close ranks around just their particular party and vote in unison?
Yeah, look, the major parties close ranks. The major parties, I like to call them two wings on the same bird. So in Australia, we have the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. These two parties cooperate and work in unison on every single issue of true importance. Like you mentioned before, the misinformation bill that's coming through Australian Parliament right now, and also something similar going through the NZ Parliament. That bill was originally floated by the Liberal Party, which is our traditional centre-right party here in Australia. It didn't get up, thank God, but the idea behind the bill has now been grabbed by the Labor Party in Australia, which is the traditional centre-left party. So this is an example of how these two parties really work together for the disadvantage of the average person at home. So what I'd like to say to the Australians that might be watching this reel or this broadcast or whatever it ends up being is that the Labor and Liberal duopoly, which what they really are, do not have your best interests at heart. In fact, in my opinion, they can't stand you. So I would say to them, move away from voting for these two major parties and look at your minor parties instead, because your minor parties are more authentic, they're closer to the ground, and they actually care, most of them actually care about the future of our country. So that's very important for people to understand.
What are your top 3 issues heading into this year? Well, we're already halfway through this year, but what are some of the main key issues that you think everyday average Australians are facing on a parliamentary level that they might not know about?
Yeah, obviously at the moment, front of mind is the disinformation bill. That is huge, because if you say that the government can decide what is mis or disinformation, and you say that the government has the right to remove that content from the internet or from podcasts or from website, etc., that's a very, very dangerous thing. Because you've got a government right now that you might agree with, but what happens in 5 and 10 and 15 years and 20 years when those laws are in, when a government comes to power that you may not agree with? That's very, very dangerous stuff. The next thing is obviously cost of living. We're going through a huge cost of living crisis right now. People are genuinely suffering from economic mismanagement. And the third thing is probably this whole net zero agenda that we have going on right now. The whole net zero agenda, the elite, the people that run the world right now, they like to say, it's about saving the world. But, we'll save the world if we tax you more. We'll save the world if we give you more regulations. We'll save the world if we take away cheap energy. It's absolute madness. What it really is it's a way to centralize power and give the people at the top of that pyramid more and more control over your life. And I'll give you a fourth one as well. I know you didn't ask for it, but I'll give you a fourth one. The fourth thing that I think is really important that people understand right now is the central bank digital currency. Now, for people like that who may not know, what the central bank digital currency is essentially programmable digital money, where the government will know exactly how much money you have, of course, where you've spent it, what you spent it on, where it's going, if it's coming in, if it's going out. And because it's programmable, they can decide what you can and can't do with your money. I'll give you one example. So they might say, okay, yeah, you've spent too much money on red meat this month. And because we've signed up to this net zero agenda, next month, because it's going to take up too much carbon, you can't have red meat. Or, you were supposed, you want to buy an international flight, but you can't because your international flight emits too much carbon. So I think the central bank digital currency is one of the biggest things that people need to be aware of right now in our country.
If people are concerned about this, what can they do to actually take a stand against it? Because I agree, centralised digital currencies are a real concern. They're a concern around many countries around the world. But what can the average everyday person actually do?
They can do a lot. So what they can first and foremost do is take a greater interest in the political process. And if they already have an interest in the political process, what they can do is they can make their friends and family aware of what's happening right now in our nation, of the issues like the CBDC and social credit scores and all these kind of things. So the things that I would ask people to do right now that understand the problems, that understand what's happening, is don't be quiet. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues at the water cooler at work. Share the information that you have. Because right now we live in a country where people are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to be the nail that stands up because they know they're going to get hit with the hammer. They're going to forget that stuff and they've got to speak, which goes back again to the disinformation and misinformation which we talked about earlier, where government is trying to restrict speech. So be brave. Courage is contagious. Don't let the system, the government, or whatever it is, anyone else silence you. You need to speak. And if you speak, if you spread your knowledge, things will change. And obviously, this goes without saying, volunteer and join a political party. It doesn't have to be my party, but join a party that aligns with your values and get out there and become a part of the process, a part of fixing things. Because if you just sit at home and you're quiet and you're silent, nothing will change and it will just keep getting worse. And then your children will one day wake up in a country that you don't recognize anymore. And because they've grown up in the system as it exists at that time, to them it will be normal. And the generation after that, and the generation after that, et cetera, et cetera. And one day in a few generations, children will be living a complete dystopian nightmare and we won't know how they got there. So do something about it now while you can.
What made you want to get into politics?
I've always been interested in the political process, but what made me really interested in politics and wanting to get in my hands and then get stuck in is the overreach of the global elite. The global elite have always existed. They've always wanted power, and fair enough, I can understand that. But they've created a world today where they just want to step on the throat of the average everyday person, and they're just pushing and pushing and pushing it, and it's just getting too much. And I had to stand up and do something about it. And I had to say, you know what? We understand that there will always be, a global elite, and there will always be the average person. We get that, but you can't keep pushing like this. And what really, really tipped me over the complete edge was the global response to COVID. Because anyone who looks at COVID for more than 10 minutes really understands what COVID was. COVID was a way to centralize power. COVID was a way to get more control. COVID was a way to take away from the working class and give to the global, and I keep saying global elite because that's the best way I think to describe these people, to take from the working class and give to the global elite. And when I saw that happening and I saw everyone falling into line, I said, either they're scared to speak or they don't understand what's happening. And I, as someone who understands what's happening, I have to get in there and I have to basically wave the flag and say, follow me. I understand what's going on. We need to do something to save our nations.
Final thing, before we wrap up, is there any last minute things that you would like the people of New Zealand or Australia to know about yourself or about the UAP?
Look, the UAP and myself, we will always fight for what is right. We will always fight for traditional conservative values. But what I'd like to say to the people of New Zealand is that you're not alone. The things that are happening in New Zealand at the moment are happening in many other Western democracies. And why is that? Why was the COVID response exactly the same in New Zealand as it was in Australia, as it was in Canada? Why are the same misinformation bills and disinformation bills being passed at the same time in New Zealand as they are in Australia? Why is that happening? It's because the world is not controlled by the people that you think control the world today. Your politician, your average politician in your parliament right now is a puppet. They are a puppet. They take their orders from someone else. They take their orders from globalist interests. Those people are, like the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the WHO, etc. All those globalist organizations. That's who they take their orders from. These people are unelected. They are unaccountable. They could not give a stuff about you or your nation. So I would say to the people of both of our countries, I would say, take a greater interest in the political process. Do something about it and stop voting for the establishment parties. The establishment parties are there to give you the illusion of choice. There's a party on the left or a coalition of parties on the left, and there's a party on the right or a coalition of parties on the right. These people are establishment lackeys. They're not genuine everyday people that really care about you and your nation. And if they are, they've bent the knee, they've touched their toes to globalist interests. Stop voting for them, take a greater interest, and vote for minor parties and individuals and candidates that have proven that they care about your individual nations and support them. That's what I would say to those people.
And finally, outside of politics, what's your one great piece of life advice?
I would say, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. Always follow your heart and always believe in yourself. I had a lot of people tell me that I couldn't do so many things in my life. And here I am today. I'm the Senator for Victoria in Australia in federal parliament. So always follow what you believe is the right path for yourself and don't listen to naysayers. It's natural human behavior to be risk averse or to say you can't do this or that or whatever it is. Don't listen to them. If you want to do something, grab it by the horns, go for it, and just do it.